Welcome to Getting Started Part 2. In this course, we're going to implement the lessons we learned in Part 1 and go step by step to build a project management platform. In the app that we will create together today, we will allow users to sign up, create a team, invite other team members, create projects, create and assign tasks, and more. If you haven't seen Part 1 yet, we recommend watching it before you dive in. We will be building together with a pre-designed template made special for this course, which has nearly all of our pages laid out and designed ahead of time so you can focus on connecting all of the pieces together to help jumpstart your journey. We recommend you use this template, but feel free to follow along with your own blank app and design it as we go. Also, be sure to download the assets folder provided with this course located on our Academy course page so you can use the same image resources that we do. This course is broken down into 3 parts: setup, app pages, and test and deploy. We recommend watching and following along in full. All right, let's start building. First, navigate to the template page found as a resource linked in this course. Make sure you're logged into your account and click Install Template. From here, Bubble will add the template to your account and navigate you to your apps where you can create a new app with the template. Everything we do in this course with this template can be achieved on a free plan. Now that the app is created, let's talk about the pages included and how we think about app structure. If your app is using the template, the pages you need will already be created for you. If you're building from scratch, you can build each blank page now as we review them and then design them as we go. When first thinking of your app, it's best to think about all the pages, or views if you're building a single page app, based on the actions you want the user to take. For this app, we open on our index page, which we will use as our landing page to act as our marketing for this project management app. We'll also want a sign up page to walk users through creating an account, a team, and the basics of their profile. A dashboard page for members of a team to see all of their teammates and their ongoing projects. A project page to view an individual project and that project's tasks. And a profile page to view all the tasks assigned to that user. Of course, there are also ancillary pages that we'll want to have, like a login page, a reset password page, and a 404 page. Depending on how you want to plan out your app ahead of time, you can break this down further by listing the actions you want users to take on that page. For example, on the project page, users can create tasks and edit them. The more planning you do ahead of time, the easier it will be for you to jump into Bubble and successfully launch your app. Now that we have a clear picture of the pages that will make up our project management app, we're ready to start building. To start things off, we're going to build a landing page from scratch. Even if you're using our template, you'll notice that the only thing present on the index page is an image representing the intended final design. Let's take a closer look at the actual finished landing page. We have a header, a hero, some value props, testimonials, and a footer. You can find all of these images in the assets folder that you download from our course resources. Now we could start dragging out individual elements and groups and customizing our design, but as a faster method, we can use Bubble's component library to drag on pre-built components and create the skeleton of our landing page in seconds. All of these pre-built components are mobile ready and use your app style variables, so when you drag them on, they're already on brand. Let's use components to build our landing page. First, I'll drag in a header component, then a hero, 3 value props alternating left and right, a 4th value prop for testimonials, and finally a footer. Be sure to pay attention to where the drag indicator shows up when dragging components onto the page, as we want to drag these components onto the page itself and not into another component. Of course, if you do make a mistake, you can easily correct it by reorganizing your parent-child hierarchy in the elements tree. And just like that, in barely a minute, we've got ourselves a landing page. The component library is a great resource to rapidly build pages or even source inspiration for your own designs. Now that we have this structure, let's customize it further. To start, let's go through and adjust our copy so that we are showcasing the right messaging for our project management app. In addition, let's clear out the default images and upload our own from the assets folder. We can also start deleting things that we won't need in our final design, such as this body of text and even these buttons in our header. As we speed up this process a little, feel free to follow along exactly, or experiment with the content on your own. There's a few elements missing from our design that didn't come from the components. Down here, for example, I'll copy this larger text element and paste it into the footer. Using copy and paste is a great way to speed up design work. Just make sure to paste it into the right group within the larger parent-child hierarchy. For the footer, I'll go ahead and delete this group with the icons and rewrite the copy in both text elements. As we can see in our final example, I want these two buttons in my footer as well. To get those, let's scroll back up and copy these from the header. Since they're already grouped, we can actually just copy the group, come back down, and paste them inside this group, and there we go. I'll clear the data associated to it, and horizontally center it within the column. Continuing the copy and paste method, let's copy our headline here and scroll all the way back up and paste it into the header. Here, let's rename it to whatever our app name is, and customize its appearance by changing its font size and font weight. Next, in the Layout tab, we'll select Fit Width to Content to have the width of the element match the length of the text, and we'll center align it. Last, we'll delete our logo here so this element can take its place. This hero section is our call to action, so I want to add an action for our users to take. Let's copy the Sign Up button here in the header and paste it in. In the Layout tab, I'll make it have a min width of 200, so it's a bit larger, and we'll center it. We can come back at any time to adjust these layout settings. For right now, let's add some final touches to our page. For example, let's add some brand logos underneath our hero. Since there wasn't a component for that, let's create one. Select a group, make sure the indicator line is set between the groups and not in one of them, and draw it on the page. First thing I do when I create a new group like this is to define the right responsive container layout, which here will be column. Then I make sure its width stretches and shrinks infinitely to the canvas. To do that, I'll uncheck fixed width and remove the min width and leave the max width at infinite. Then I'll give it a higher min height of 200 so we have more space to work with. Next, let's draw an image element in this group and upload our custom image with all of our sample brand logos. Once that's uploaded, I'll adjust the layout settings, starting with unchecking fixed width so it's responsive. I want it to shrink with the parent group, so I'll get rid of the min width, but I also don't want it to stretch beyond the actual image's original resolution, so I'll set the max width at 1200. To make sure it retains the same aspect ratio as it grows or shrinks, I'll check this box to keep it fixed. We can input any aspect ratio here, but since our image is already perfectly sized for our page, we can actually punch in its exact measurements in pixels, which is 1193 by 45. So now our image is perfectly sized and responsive within our parent group. Let's align the image to be centered on the page, and then for its parent group, set the container alignment of the column to be centered as well. Last, let's just rename this for organization. We can of course go back at any time and rename any elements that we need to. Now that this section's done, let's quickly add in one more by just copying and pasting this group. Then let's copy and paste a headline, remove the image, and rewrite the copy. To center this alignment, let's go to the Layout tab and select the Center Horizontal Alignment instead of Stretch. This allows us to use Fit Width to Content so it fits to its length or min width. Okay, we have all the sections we need for our landing page laid out, but we still need to add color to styles and fix our images. Before we complete that though, consider how our groups are structured. In Bubble, good responsive design will often feature multiple layers of nested groups. In general, you'll have cleaner and more versatile design if you take full advantage of the parent-child hierarchy. For example, notice how this pre-built footer comes with two groups at the top of its hierarchy alone. The outermost group is set to stretch across the full canvas. This is the group that dictates how the entire section behaves responsively in relation to the page. Whereas the second group is specifically designed to dictate how the content is responsive in relation to the section. This is a good foundation for responsive building and will help you design robust but flexible pages. So as you go on to design your own, consider building each section with the following mindset. Have a main parent group that stretches to the width of the page. Inside that, have a main container group to dictate the max width you want to use. And inside that, have a group or nested groups to organize each of the elements for that container type. Let's bring this design together by adjusting our images. Starting with our main hero image, we want this to sit on the bottom of our group. First, adjust this image by getting rid of the min and max widths. Then set the aspect ratio to match the original image dimensions of 1196 by 350 pixels. Next, let's uncheck Fit Width to Content so it's not bound to the min width or contents within, and then increase the max width to 1200 pixels. Finally, uncheck Fit Height to Content so this group stretches to its parent's height. This is important so we can set the container alignment. If we select that main parent group, we can adjust the min height, and finally, change this group alignment from centered to bottom so this image sits right at the edge of the group itself. Let's go ahead and adjust all of the value prop images next. First, let's select the main container group and adjust the max width to be 1200 pixels. Then, let's adjust the image aspect ratio to match the dimensions of the image. When we do that, the group it's in will grow in height to match, making our other group look misaligned. So let's center align our other group and adjust the row gap between the text. Now I'll go ahead and do the exact same thing on the two other value props. Now our landing page is really shaping up, so it's time to talk color and styles. If we go to the Styles tab and select our style variables, we have plenty to set up. These options here are global to your app. For example, this is our app font that by default will be used by every style and component unless we say otherwise. The template should already be set to Roboto for us, but feel free to set this to a font you'd prefer. Next, we have our color variables, which is used to set default colors across all styles. And if we change any, they automatically update. For example, if we change the color for the background color variable, we can see that the change is instantaneous, and almost all of our backgrounds from components now reflect that color since they're using that variable. I'll go ahead and reset that back to white. Now we'll reference all of these throughout the different pages of our app. However, because a landing page often has its own style, we might want to create our own color variables. For example, I'll create this one and name it landing page background. I'll give it a description, and then set the color to what I want. I'll go ahead and make another one for landing page text and set this color to white so it doesn't interfere with our primary color for text. Now back in the Design tab, if we go to the header, instead of it using the original background variable, I'll switch it to use our newly created landing page background variable. Since that color is dark, I'll make sure to switch all of the text elements to use our landing page text, which is light. And I'll go ahead and do the same thing for our hero section to really make it pop. And for our footer. Finally, let's add one finishing touch to the footer by setting the container group to have a 1200 pixel max width and increase the min height. Now when we preview, we can see our customized landing page is done and looks great. Feel free to continue experimenting with your own look and design, and don't forget to use this opportunity to define any style presets or color variables you wish to use for the rest of your app. So go ahead and change the built-in ones now. Feel free to use the same colors that I am. Alright, next let's move on to signing up new users. Our sign-up flow has three forms. First, our user fills out their name, email, and password. Next, they create their first team. And finally, they have the option to set up a profile picture. If you're using the template, you should see these three sections laid out on the page, ready to go. Now if we preview, we'll see all three forms displayed together. But as we reviewed earlier, our completed app is set up to only show one form at a time. To build this, we need to control when these forms show and hide for our users. And a common way to achieve something like this is with something called custom states. A custom state is a powerful feature in Bubble that allows you to attach temporary data to any kind of element, even the page itself. With a custom state, we can be really creative with how we control the visibility of the forms on the page. So let's open the Page Property Editor and select the eye icon to open the Element Inspector tab, where we'll see the option to add a new custom state. I'll opt to add this custom state directly on the page element itself, but we could technically add it to any element here. It solely depends on how you want to organize it. I'll name the new state View, and while we can define the state type to be anything, let's make it a number. We can define other options as well, like whether or not the state defines a list of numbers or just a single number. And we can give it a default value to start, which we'll set to 0, and we'll see why in just a moment. Let's go to our first form and add a conditional to this group that references our new custom state. To find it, I'll find the name of the page to start our expression. And you can see at the bottom, our new custom state is available from the page. So let's say that when the page's view is not 0, we'll change the visibility. We'll find this element is visible property and leave it unchecked. Since by default our page's view will be set to 0, this condition will not be met, which is exactly what we want. As this is the first form to load, this first form should be visible by default. If view changes from 0 to any other number, this group will no longer be visible. Let's take the same logic and apply it to the other two forms. We'll create the same conditional, but this time we'll say when the view is 1, then this element is visible is checked. This condition directly looks to control this form's visibility if view is 1. However, this won't stop this form from fully loading when the page loads. To ensure that this form is hidden, in the Layout tab, we must uncheck this property so it's not visible at all unless this condition is met. We'll also keep collapse when hidden checked so it doesn't take up any space on the page when it's invisible. Let's do this once more with our third form, and to save time, let's copy the expression from the condition and with our last form selected, paste. Now let's change the number here to 2, add our visibility property, and uncheck visible on page load. To recap, we now have a custom state on the page that is a number, and we've now assigned each form to be visible when that custom state is set to a specific number. 0 by default for the first step, 1 for the next step, and 2 for the last step. We can still see all three forms in our editor since we're still on the page, but when we navigate away from the page, only the elements with this element is visible on page load will be visible. Remember, we can always use the elements tree to hide and show elements visibility to edit it. If we preview the page, we'll see that instead of all three forms showing up, we only see the first form as expected, and the other two forms are hidden. Now, we need to implement a way for the page's custom state to change so we can see the other steps. We'll do this with workflows. Let's open the property editor for the sign up button in our first form and start a workflow. This creates a new event for when this element is clicked. While we want this button to change the custom state, we first want it to capture the fields the user inputted and sign the user up. So under Account, we will find the Sign User Up action. This action is now asking for what values it'll use to define the new user's credentials. So we'll map each of these fields to the corresponding input values from our form. Email will take our input email's value, and password will take input enter password's value. Now there's some other properties available to you when signing a user up that you could check, but we won't get into that in this example. Instead, we want to map a custom field from the user data type. Our form, after all, asks the user for their first name and last name, so we'll want to capture that here and store it with their credentials. Let's navigate to the Data tab. If you're using our template, you'll see several custom data types have already been created for you. If you're building from scratch, please go ahead and make these data types now. Select the user data type. As we learned in part 1, the user data type comes with every app, and our email field is built in. We won't see password here because Bubble encrypts password behind the scenes, but that is built in here too. What we need to do is add custom fields, one for first name, which will be type text, and one for last name, which is also text. Once that's done, we can store the first and last names of our users. So back in our signup workflow, let's define our two new fields. We could click Change Another Field, or we can click Add All Fields, and all custom fields not yet represented here will show up. In our case, first name and last name. Let's map both of these fields to their corresponding inputs values. Usually a good rule of thumb whenever a user submits a form is for the next action to reset relevant inputs. That way, those inputs will be reset to blank after the button is clicked. Now in this workflow, we're ready to send the user to the next part of the signup process, but they're not going to another page. We need to hide the current form and show the next one by changing the custom state. Let's go to Element Actions and select Set State. The custom state we want to set is attached to the page, so we'll select the page, select View, and now we can define the new value. By default, the page opened with it set to 0. Now once they click the Sign Up button, we'll set it to 1. Important to note, when the sign user up action is triggered, the user will then be considered logged in. So now back in the Design tab, we're ready to set up our second form where our user creates their team. And in order for them to do this, we need to create the team data type, which again in our template is already created. For team, we need to add in 2 new fields for us to track. First, to identify the team, we'll create a name, which will be type text. And next, in order for us to assign an admin for the team, we'll create a team admin of type user. Now let's start a new workflow on the Continue button. For step 1, we'll look under Data and find the Create a New Thing action, where the newly signed up user will create their new team. In this action, when we create the team, we define the fields the team needs. Name will map from input team name's value in our form, and for team admin, which needs a user, we'll select the current user, so the person who's creating the team during signup is automatically registered in this position. So now a team will know who its admin user is, but to let the team and user data types talk to each other, let's go back to the user data type and do a similar process. We'll create a field for our user called team, and we'll set it to type team. So back in our workflow for step 2, we'll come down to account and select make changes to current user. Here, we'll go ahead and set our new field team to match the team we created in step 1. To reference that team, we could try to search our database and pull the right thing from the list, but it's more efficient if we use the result of expression to reference the team that was just created from the previous step. Finally, let's add a step 3 to this workflow to reset relevant inputs for the form. And for our last step here, we'll copy the last action from our first workflow where we set the custom state. However, this time, we'll set view from 1 to 2. Now when the user fills out their team and clicks the Continue button, this group will hide and the final form of our signup flow will show. Uploading a profile picture is a very common feature in a productivity app like this, so for our final form, you'll see we're not using any text inputs, and instead we're using the picture uploader element. And rather than creating a workflow to make changes to the logged in user, the second the user uploads a picture, we're going to auto-bind it to that user. Auto-binding is the process of automatically saving or updating data to a field on a data type without a workflow. Here's the auto-binding checkbox. You can see it's ready to auto-bind onto the parent element's thing. The parent element here is this group profile picture, but this has nothing predefined for its type of content. Let's actually define the type of content and the data source for this group to be type user and data source current user. Now this group and any child elements within are bound to the current user, the person actively looking at this form. So now our form is ready to auto-bind the profile picture that the user uploads, but we must first create the profile picture field on the user data type. So let's go to the user data type and create a new field for profile picture of type image. Now not all users want to upload a profile picture, so instead of making it mandatory, the best option here is to support users who don't want to upload a picture by setting a default profile picture that everyone starts with right out of the gate. To set this, let's upload a default image for the profile picture field from our assets folder provided with this course. With that set, now we're ready on the database side of things, so let's go back to take another look at our picture uploader in the Design tab. Now that we have the applicable field, let's set the profile picture field to auto-bind. When we do that, Bubble issues a warning to us that if we want to modify a thing of type user with auto-binding, we must set privacy rules on the user data type. So let's click on this warning to take us to our privacy rules tab. Here we can see under user that there is already a default privacy rule defining how a user can interact with their own data. This rule is simply checking for when this user is current user. Auto-binding for this rule is already checked, but not the individual fields. So since we want the current user to set their profile picture this way, check the auto-binding field for profile picture. Everyone else shouldn't have these permissions, so we don't need to change anything here. Privacy rules are crucial to ensure the right person is able to perform the right actions in our app. We'll add more privacy rules later in this course, but for now, we can go back to the Design tab, and we can see that the warning message is gone. Now since we're auto-binding, we don't actually have to make any changes in this workflow. All we need to do to close out the signup process is navigate the newly signed up user to the next phase of their experience. So let's start a workflow for this button, and when this button is clicked, let's send the user to the dashboard page. Under Navigation, we'll select the Go to Page action and find Dashboard. When we do, we get an issue. The dashboard page is expecting us to send specific data to it. So let's go to the dashboard page and inspect its property editor to see why. The dashboard page has a type of content set to team. It wants to know a specific team in the database that it can use to populate all of the relevant elements throughout the dashboard. If we want to send our user to the dashboard page, we'll need to send the page a specific team. Let's go back to our signup page and edit the last workflow. We know exactly what team we want to send to the dashboard, the team our user just created. So let's send data for the current user's team. And now the dashboard will populate all the info with that new team. All right, with that done, let's test out this signup page. First, let's create a test user, John Doe, with a fake email and password, and then we'll hit sign up. This changes our view custom state and shows our next form where we can name our team. I'll call it my first team. And when we continue, our custom state changes again. And now we're onto our profile picture. We can see that our default picture is already in place. So let's go ahead and upload one of our sample profile pictures from our assets folder and hit finish. Now we're taken straight to the dashboard page of our new team. Since we haven't yet set up the dashboard page, it's hard to tell that this belongs to John Doe's team. But take a look at the URL structure. The URL is taking us to our dashboard specifically for this unique ID, which as we set up, it's John Doe's team. To confirm this, if we go to the Data tab and look at our app data, under Users, we can see John Doe, the profile picture, and that unique ID for the team. We can even see that team itself under All Teams. Now that we have our signup page complete, let's build out our login functionality. If we go to our login page, you'll notice the template gives us the same setup as our signup page, though in this case, it's just 2 forms instead of 3. One form is for logging in, and the other is in case the user forgets their password and needs a reset email. So to show these conditionally, let's add a custom state. On the login page property editor, let's create a new custom state called view and make it type number. We'll make the default value 0. Next, let's add conditions to both forms. First, on our login group, we'll write when the logins view is not 0, then this element is visible is not checked. And for the reset password group, we'll say when the login view is 1, then this element is visible is checked. For this reset password form, we'll uncheck visible on page load so it only shows when the user changes the state. To preview what this would look like without going to run mode, if we reveal this in the elements tree, we can hide this element on the page. With that set, let's start a workflow for our login button. Here we'll find the action log the user in, and we'll map the relevant input values from the login form for email and password. After the login action runs, current user will equal the logged in user. So now in our step 2 action, we can send the user to the dashboard page, and we'll make sure to send the current user's team as the data to send to populate the dashboard. Back in the Design tab, we have 2 other buttons in our login form to set up. 1 for the user to create an account, and 2 for them to reset their password. For the Create Account button, we'll start a workflow to navigate the user to the signup page. And for the Reset Password button, we'll change the custom state. Under Element Actions, we'll set the state of Login's view and change the view to 1. Because of our conditions on the form, the login group will hide and this Reset Password group will show. For the Reset Password form, we have 2 workflows to set up. Let's tackle this button first. Bubble provides a lot of user-related functionality out of the box, so we can go under Account and find an action for sending a password reset email. Now all we need to define is which email to send it to, which will be our relevant input from the form. This action lets you write the contents of the email, but will send the email with a link generated for you to navigate the user to your app's reset password page. Every Bubble app comes with this reset password page by default, where even the workflows are already set up for you. Okay, for step 2, let's reset relevant inputs. And for step 3, let's jump back to our Design tab. In our template, we have a hidden element in this group, an alert element that lets the user know the email has been sent. We can go back into our workflow, and under Element Actions, we can find Show Message. By default, an alert element will remain hidden on the page until shown. When it appears, it will hold for a set length that you define. You can also define how long it takes to fade in and fade out. Lastly, to make sure our users can navigate back to the login form, let's start a workflow here and set the state of view back to 0. Let's preview our new login page and test to make sure that our custom states are working. Then let's sign in as our test user, log in, and our app takes us to the dashboard page for that user's team. Feel free to test out the reset password flow to make sure it's working as well. But now that we're all set up here, we can start building out our app functionality, starting with our app's header. Our project management app will exist across 3 distinct pages: Dashboard, Project, and Profile. We'll tackle each page one at a time, but to start, we'll build out our header functionality, which will be the common thread across all 3 pages. Wherever we are in our project management app, our header will show us our team name, allow us to navigate between pages, and show us info about who is logged in. Given that we'll need this header across multiple pages, we've set it up in a reusable element. In the template, that reusable is already present on all 3 pages for us. We only need to edit the elements within the reusable to set it up. For those of you building from scratch, you'll want to create a new reusable header element now and build it out with your own design as we go. First, we have a bold text element on the left where we'll display our team name. We also have a row group on the right which contains a small image for our profile picture and a text element. In the elements tree, we'll notice we also have a few things hidden that we'll need to customize as well. A group focus that is attached to the small text element on the right, a settings pop-up with 2 forms, and a profile picture pop-up. Let's start by editing our bold text element on the left. In order for it to display the user's team name, we'll use dynamic data to display current user's team. This gives us access to the fields on the team data type, where we can find name, which is type text. Remember, the issue checker will warn you if an expression is not evaluating to the appropriate type in the given context. So use it to your advantage to learn why there is an issue. With that taken care of, let's move to the text in our group on the right. Here, we will use dynamic data to display the current user's email, so we know which account is logged in. Lastly, for the image element here, we'll set this to be a dynamic image using current user's profile picture. Pay attention to some of the image settings the template has already applied to this element. The run mode rendering is set to zoom, so the image will fill the full dimensions of the element, and we have a style defined that sets the image element's roundness to 99 pixels. This will give the image a circular look. If we go back to preview and make sure that we're previewing the page with a specific team sent to populate the page, we'll see the basics of our header complete. Now that the header displays information, let's add some workflows. First, let's start with our team name text element. As part of a typical header design, when a user clicks on this team name, they should navigate to their team dashboard. So we'll start a workflow here and create that action now by navigating to the dashboard page with the current user's team. Next, we want to open up the group focus menu when a user clicks on their email here, and it's already set to reference our text element, so it's going to appear below this location when the user clicks. Let's start a workflow on the current user's email text element and find the show action to show the group focus. Back in run mode, if we click on the user's email, our group focus element shows and drops down 3 button-like elements. For those of you building from scratch, you can build this out however you'd like. These buttons are actually 3 groups made to feel like buttons. This is a design choice made that gives us more flexibility so we can combine icons with text. Subsequently, we can start a workflow for when the user clicks the group and not just the text, so the user has more surface area that they can use to trigger the workflow. Speaking of which, let's add a workflow to this first group in the group focus to navigate the user to their profile page. Like the dashboard page, the profile page needs data to be sent alongside it, but this time, instead of a team, we need to send the user whose profile we want to go to, in this case, the current user. Back in our header design, because we navigated away, we'll need to show the group focus again since it hides by default. Then let's start a new workflow for the settings group. When clicked, we want settings to show our settings pop-up. So in our workflow, let's find show and select the pop-up for settings. We'll handle the functionality inside the pop-up next. For now, let's finish setting up the last button in our group focus for logging out. Here, let's start a workflow under account, log the user out. So let's preview again and test. If we click on profile, we'll be taken to this user's profile page. We haven't customized this page yet, but we can confirm in the URL that we are in fact looking at a profile page with the current user's unique ID. And because our header is in a reusable element and is already on this page, we still have all the same functionality we just set up. So here, let's load the settings pop-up, and if I click away, it hides. But I can actually see there's a small bug here because the group focus is still showing. So let's fix that real quick. We'll add a step 2 to this workflow after it shows the pop-up, and under element actions, we'll select hide and pick the group focus. With that done, let's get back to our header design. We have the profile picture of the logged in user displaying, but if we wanted to give the user access to change it, we needed to trigger the profile picture pop-up. So let's start a workflow and show the profile picture pop-up. Now let's take a look at the profile picture pop-up for a second, because this is actually the same functionality we employed last time when signing up by using auto binding. The template already has it in a group that's set to the current user, and once we enable auto binding, we can modify that user's profile picture field to the current user. Let's test that out. In run mode, if we click on our profile picture, we'll see our pop-up, and let's upload a new profile picture from our assets folder and watch as it auto binds. So now that that pop-up is functioning, let's set up the settings pop-up. Here we see a clean form in 2 parts. One part that lets the user change their password, and one part that lets the user update their email. Giving the option for your user to customize this is standard and worth setting up first so you don't forget to do this later on. Fortunately, setting it up is fairly simple. On the Change Password button, we'll start a workflow, and under Account, we'll have an option to update the user's credentials. Automatically built into this action is a request for the user's old password, a good security measure. If we pop back to the Design tab, we can see that our form has an input for the old password. We'll use that input's value here. And below, we'll see that we can use this action for both updating password and email. For this button, we'll check that we're changing the password and grab the corresponding input's value. Our form even has an input for password confirmation, so let's check that here and grab that value too. Now let's do the same thing for the Update Email button. You'll notice we have 2 inputs here, the new email and the current password. That's because, again, we're going to use the same action for updating the user's credentials, and this action requires their password by default. So let's grab those relevant input values and change the email instead. Last, we'll add another action to this workflow to hide the pop-up element. We can copy and paste this to the previous workflow too, and hide that pop-up as well. For extra cleanup, you may wish to also add in a step to reset relevant inputs so the form clears. And like that, our reusable header is done. Next, we're going to tackle the dashboard page. The dashboard page will display all of the members of our team, as well as all of our team's projects. To begin setting this up, let's go to the Data tab and make sure we have the right data structure ready for this. Let's look at our project data type. Let's add some fields, a name, type text, and then we're going to give each project an assigned team, which will be type team. Back in the Design tab, let's look at everything we need on the page. If you're not using the template, feel free to take a few minutes now to build this out on your own. First, we have a group to the left which displays our list of team members, and we have a group to the right which displays all projects. And then we have buttons underneath, one to add a user to the team, and 2 other buttons to add a new project. We'll learn more about why we have this larger button later. We also have a few hidden pop-ups that we can see in the elements tree, one to add a new team member, one to edit a team member, and one to create a project. Starting with the Create New Project pop-up, it only asks for a name. Let's start a workflow on this button, and here we'll create a new thing of type project. Click Add All Fields so all of our project fields appear. For name, let's map the value of that input to our pop-up, and for team, we want to attribute this new project to our current user's team since they're the one creating it. We could retrieve this data from current user's team, but we have a new option from the dashboard called Current Page Team. Current Page Team is a data source that already has the right team from our user, so we'll use that. Great, now let's reset relevant inputs and hide the pop-up. Next, we need to figure out when to show this pop-up, and in the template, you'll see multiple places where we want to trigger this. Let's start a workflow on this Add Project button and find the Show action under Element Actions, Show, and select the pop-up. Let's go back and do the same thing for this button. And then like we noticed before, we have another button below, and I'll go ahead and set up the same workflow. To preview, I'll click any of these buttons and the pop-up will appear. And we can even create our first test project. I'll call it Mobile Design and hit Create. Now, of course, nothing shows up on our page because we haven't set up the list to display the projects. But if we go to check our database under App Data, we'll see that we do in fact have a new project called Mobile Design, which is associated to the right team and the user who created it. So now let's set up our repeating group to display our projects. If we click on a repeating group, for those of you using the template, you'll see there's already a type of content and data source defined, but this is dummy data that we placed in. Arbitrary text is only here so that Bubble doesn't give us an error. Let's replace this. First, we'll set the type of content to project, since that's what we'll be displaying, and for our data source, we'll actually just clear it for now. To familiarize ourselves more with the template, let's look at the first cell of our repeating group, because we're getting an issue in the issue checker. We have a group within this cell that also has the dummy type of content set that matched the text, but now that it's project, let's change it to match. This group is what we will use to display each individual project. Back in our repeating group, let's set its data source to be a list of all the projects we want to pull from. To do this, we'll use the do a search for expression and set it to look for projects. That will return a list of literally all of the projects in our database. Since we don't want every project to show up, we must constrain this search by team. Here we want to search projects whose associated team equals the current page team, and we want to display this in descending order based on created date, so our most recently created projects show up first. Now that that's set up, we're ready to actually populate the group with data from the project type. Within our first cell, we have our group that we set up a second ago. Each project that is displayed here will have 10 pixels between one another due to the margin that this group has. First, we want to display the project name. So within this text element, let's use dynamic data that says parent group's project's name like so. Now if we go and refresh the page, we'll see that our team dashboard is showing our project. Remember when we looked at the Finish app that this is where we want to show all of the users who are members of this project. So let's set that up next. Back in our Data tab, let's add a new field to our project data type called Member List and make the type User. We'll also check that it's a list, so this field can store multiple users. Since we've added this list and the project already exists, we have a couple things to clean up. For one, we should revisit our workflow to create a new project, because when a new project is created, by default, it should add the creator to this list too, and we don't have that yet. So let's go back here and add in our new member list field and add current user. That'll be good to start. Later on, we'll be able to add other members of our team too. Next, if we look at our test project, the member list field is there, but it's empty because we created this field after this test project was created. Easy enough, we can manually fix this by editing the entry and adding our user to the list. Now back in the Design tab, we need to display this information in our cell where we display the projects. For this, we have a group here that we need to set up. First, let's set the type of content and data source to pull from the current cell's project. I encourage you to explore the template for groups like this and try creating them on your own. Notice we have a text element, and we also have another repeating group, though it's a little hard to see at the moment. This is a tiny repeating group that will display all of the profile pictures of every user attached to the project. So for it, we have the type of content set to image, but we need to define its data source. So under Parent Group's project, we'll select the member list and scroll down to find each item's profile picture. Then inside this repeating group in our first cell, we'll dynamically change this image to be the current cell's image. This lets us pull from our list of members and display each of their profile pictures next to one another if they're part of this project. Next to this, we have another text element. Here we want to display how many tasks are attached to a given project. So let's set up the database for tasks. We have another custom data type called tasks here, and we'll add a new field called project that is type project. Now if we add text to this element, we will do a search for tasks and constrain it to look for tasks where project equals parent group's project. Then to convert it to something we can display in a text element, we'll get the count of how many tasks are in that list. Finally, we'll manually write the word tasks after. Now at the moment, we have no tasks in our database, so if we were to refresh, it'll show up as 0. But this will start to populate with tasks when we create them in our next lesson. For now, let's move on to the other half of this dashboard, the list of team members. Here we want to see all members of our team, and we want the option to add in new members. We'll achieve this with a pop-up that displays a form asking for the team member's first name, last name, and email. So let's create a workflow with this button. Because we're a logged in user creating an account for another user, we won't use the signup action. Instead, Bubble provides us with an action to create an account for someone else out of the box. This is the kind of thing that really empowers you to build something like a project management app in Bubble. We'll map the value of the input email from the pop-up here and do the same for the first and last name. Finally, we'll define the team as the current page team. We don't worry about defining the profile picture since we already have a default, and once the user joins, they can upload their own profile picture if they wish. Last, let's check this property to return the user if the account already exists. This option will check to see if the user you're trying to target already has a user account in the database and will simply select them instead, adding them to the team. There would be more advanced things to do here if the user you add to your project wants to then go on and make their own team, but it's best to keep this option checked for now and add in that kind of functionality later if you needed it. Once we create the account for another user, we'll want to send them a reset password email since we don't define one for them. That user will then receive this email, reset their password, and be able to log in to our team dashboard. To do this, let's get the result of step 1's email address so we know who to send the reset password email to. You can of course customize this email to be more on brand with how you want to communicate with your users, but for now, we'll just leave it as such. Finally, let's reset relevant inputs and hide the pop-up. Next, all we have to do is show the pop-up. We'll add a workflow to this so that when this is pressed, we show the pop-up. And we'll do the same thing with this button as well. You may notice that we're using a lot of duplicate workflows, multiple buttons on the same page to do the same thing. Later on, we'll revisit this and employ custom events to deduplicate this functionality to create a leaner, more efficient app. For now, let's preview this and add a new team member. That team member won't show up in our dashboard yet since we haven't set up that content, but they do show up in our database with their default profile picture and information. Let's set up this repeating group to display all of the users in our team. If you're using the template, go ahead and get rid of the original dummy data and replace it with user for type of content. For our data source, we want to do a search for users where the user's team equals current page team. Next, let's edit the group in our first cell to be type user. And finally, let's use the dynamic image here to be the parent group user's profile picture. And we can display the parent group user's first name like so. Now let's preview. When we refresh, we should see 2 users listed as team members, but we don't. You'll notice we do have 2 cells though, but the second cell isn't showing up. This is because of privacy rules. In the Data tab, let's check our privacy rule for user. As we saw before, we have privacy rules defined for when the user is viewing their own data, but for everyone else, no field is checked, which means our privacy is so strict right now, users can technically find other users in searches, which is why we're able to see 2 cells in our repeating group, but they can't actually see any data on other users whatsoever. To confirm this, let's use the debugger to inspect this repeating group cell. And in this, we can see that all of these fields are hidden because of privacy rules. This means that a user is there, but we can't see anything about them. Let's check the fields we want everyone else to see about other users like first name, last name, and profile picture. From there, you may want to check a few more, but we can do that as we continue building. Now when we refresh the page, our other user is visible. And at this point, I'll quickly go back and change John's profile picture back to what was originally uploaded. As a challenge, try setting up the Edit Member pop-up on your own. Show the pop-up and remove the member from the team. This can be triggered by an icon that we've hidden in the repeating group. Our dashboard page is set up for now. Next, we'll want to click on our project and view its tasks. So in the next lesson, we're going to set up the project page. In our completed example, we see that the project page will display the project's tasks as well as a calendar for that project. Back in our dashboard, we can navigate users to the project page when they click on that project's name. So before we build out the project page itself, let's start a workflow here that will navigate users to the project page. And as we've seen before, this project needs us to send specific data to populate the page, so we'll grab the current sales project. Now we're ready to go to the project page and configure its setup. Let's take stock of everything we're starting with in the template. For those of you building from scratch, feel free to add these in and design them as we go. First at the top we have our header. Down here we also have a back button, a text element for the name of our project, and an edit icon for us to edit our project. Beneath that, we have a repeating group that'll showcase each task, and we have two separate places for users to add a task to their project. To the right, we have an empty group in which we'll be adding a calendar element using a plugin later, and finally at the bottom, we have a blank state error message that will show up for any users who go to a project page for which they are not a team member of. We'll take care of that later. Now, like before, we also have some pop-ups that are hidden. Let's take a look at the first one and start there. This is our pop-up for users to create a new task. For those of you using the template, you can see all the information that will be needed to define a new task: a name, a description, a start and end date, and an assignee. Let's use that information to set up our data structure. Right now, the only custom field we have attached to tasks is the project field. Let's add some more to map to inputs from the pop-up. We'll need name, type text, description, also type text, and we'll need a field for the assigned user of type user. Note that this will be different from the creator field that came with the data type by default. Just because you created the task doesn't necessarily mean you're also assigned to the task. Next, let's add in a start date of type date and an end date of type date. These two fields are in preparation for using our calendar plugin. Now let's take another look at our pop-up. Fairly straightforward here. We have an input, a multi-line input for longer text, some date picker elements, and then lastly we have a dropdown. By default, our dropdown is using static values, but we want it to dynamically show us all of the users in our team. So let's delete that like it tells us to, and change this from static to dynamic. Remember, we want to select a user from a list of all the team members on this project. So to do this, first we select what type of choices we'll be displaying. In our case, it'll be user. And the choices source here is like a data source. In this case, we'll be fetching our list of users from the current page's project, specifically the current page project's member list. Next, we have to select the option caption. This is what is visually written to represent the thing we're selecting. For this, let's get the current option's first name, and then hit space and get current option's last name like so we can display the user's full name. Finally, if we want to set a default value for the dropdown, let's just select current user. I want to call out that all of these inputs have a "this input should not be left empty" property checked. That way, we won't allow users to accidentally add incomplete data to the database. All right, let's start our workflow on this button, create a new thing, and get all the fields, and start attributing all the right information to them. Now for project, we just want to make sure we're getting the current page project, and we'll finish up with the start date like so. Now that we have this, let's continue our workflow by resetting relevant inputs and hide the pop-up. And of course, we need to show the pop-up in the first place, so to do that, we'll add that workflow in two places, here and here. Great, now let's preview. There's no information showing, but that's to be expected because we haven't set up the page yet. However, pay careful attention to the URL. You'll notice that it's missing the unique ID of a project. Right now, this page actually isn't attached to any data because we didn't send any project to it when we loaded it. And remember, a lot of data sources throughout this page will be referencing the current page's project. To correct this, let's go back to our dashboard page and then click our actual test project. Now this time, we'll see the ID in the URL, so we have an actual project to work with. Let's go ahead and create our first task for our test mobile design project. At the moment, we only have one user who's been assigned to this particular project, so they're the only user we can select for this task. We'll change that in a bit. For now, let's press our button and trigger our workflow, and we won't see anything on the page, but in our database, under tasks, we can see our task has successfully been created. So now let's go in and display our tasks in our repeating group. For those using the template, we're going to do the same thing here that we've done before and replace the dummy type of content and data source values. So let's clear this out and change the type of content to task. Now we can perform a search for all tasks with a constraint that says the project equals the current page project. Feel free to sort this however you prefer. In this case, it might be a good idea to sort by end date with descending set to yes. Okay, now we can edit the group we have within our first cell. Type of content on this needs to be task, and then it can take in the current cell's task for its data source. Now we're free to populate this content with the specific task's information. First, let's get the parent group's name. And here we'll display the end date. When you're working with dates, Bubble provides a wide range of operators for you to format the date however broad or specific you wish. So I'll format the date like so, but feel free to play around with it as you like. Next, we have a profile picture. I'll delete this text and insert the parent group's assigned user's profile picture instead. And a little further down, there's actually a fun extra feature we can add here. In the tooltip text, we can get the assigned user's email so that you'll know the email of whoever's profile picture you're looking at when you hover over it. Okay, there's one more thing here in the list. This will actually be for us to display the status of our task, which we haven't yet set up. Up until this point, we've mostly set things up with data and data fields. However, Bubble also gives us the option to store static lists of text that we can reference throughout our app. This is what we call option sets. To see this in action, let's go to the option sets under data and let's create a new option set. I'll call this task status. Think of this like a list of preset options. By default, we are given one attribute for all of our options, the display name. And the advantage of text is that you can bring in special characters or even emojis to help add some color to your app. So I've actually gone ahead and color-coded some options with some color-circled emojis, and I'll paste these in one at a time. We've got not started, in progress, and completed. Perfect. Now that we have this, let's go back to our task data type and add in a new field called status. And we can actually find our new option set right here. Now our database knows to define this field based off of the static choices we just defined. We can even set a default right now in this dropdown. So let's say by default that all tasks are set to not started since they've all just been created. Now remember, any tasks we created before we added this in won't have this default set, so we can manually add the one task we've created and set it ourselves here. Now let's display this in a repeating group. We'll set the text to be the parent group's task status, and at this point it's looking to evaluate to type text, so we need to go a step further and select the specific attribute of display. Alright, great, let's preview this. Our repeating group shows our full list of tasks, only one at the moment, and we can even hover over the profile picture to see our little tooltip appear. And with this set up, we can now add as many tasks as we desire to populate the list even further. If we want to change something on our task, we need to be able to edit a task that's already been created. To set this up, let's take a look at another pop-up we have here, the Edit Task pop-up. Our template has set this up to look very similar to our Create Task pop-up with a few simple tweaks, and it already has the type of content and data source set up for us. You might notice we're missing a button to update the task. All we have is a Delete Task button, so how are we going to use a workflow to change the task? Thankfully, we don't need a workflow, and instead, we'll set up auto binding. Now, as we've seen here, to make sure auto binding is possible, we need to have the appropriate data source applied to the parent group that contains all relevant content. Here we can see that our pop-up is already set to the task type of content, but it doesn't have a data source. We're actually going to leave that as is because we can define it from another place. Let's go back to our repeating group. To show this pop-up, we'll start a workflow on the entire group of the task. And first we'll show the element, and next we'll find the display data in a group or pop-up action. I have it recommended here, or you can find it down here. So we want to display data in the pop-up, and the data to display here is the current cell's task, the cell that we're clicking on. This will open up the pop-up, which is ready to show a task's info, and it'll also tell the pop-up to display data for the particular task we clicked on. To go a step further, if we enable auto binding on all of these inputs, each one will be bound to the task we send to this pop-up, which means whatever task we click on to edit, all of its current info will be pre-populated for us to manipulate. We just need to enable auto binding everywhere. Name to name. For our status, which is a dropdown, we need to change this to dynamic choices, define the type of choice as task status, and then grab the source. Remember, this is a list of options, and in this case, we just want all options. So we select all task status. We'll set the display as our caption, and then finally we can auto bind it to the right field. Let's do the same thing with our task description, our start date, and our end date. Finally, we have our assignee, which is another dropdown that will have to do the same thing we did for status. We need to set it to dynamic choices, type of choices is user, the source will be current page project's member list like before, and also like before, we'll grab their first name and last name for the caption, and then we can auto-bind to it. Like before, you'll notice that every one of these needs privacy rules defined. So let's click this issue message, and under privacy, under task, let's set up a privacy rule. For clarity, let's call it auto-binding. And for our rule, let's say when this task's assigned user is current user, allow auto-binding, and let's check all of the properties so they have access to all the fields. That way, the person who's actually assigned this task has the permission. Let's test this out. If we go and select this task, it'll pull up our pop-up, and because we're the assigned user, we can change one of these fields and see it auto-bind. And just like that, the task has been updated. We can even double check by looking at the task in our database. The last thing to do in our pop-up would be to set up the workflow for the delete button, which would simply be deleting the corresponding thing and closing the pop-up. So make sure you go ahead and do that. Okay, now that we have the ability to create tasks for projects, and this is a project management app, we should also display them on a calendar. However, Bubble does not have a calendar element by default, but it does have one offered as a plugin. In the Plugins tab, let's add a plugin and search for Calendar. The Bubble community drives a constantly evolving marketplace of plugins that are available for your app. Some are free and some are paid. There's also a collection of Bubble-made plugins available to you, which is in fact what we'll be using with Bubble's full calendar plugin. Let's click Install. Back in the Design tab, we can see a new calendar element is available here. In our template, let's drag the calendar element into this group and delete the text element. This calendar is going to relay important information about task deadlines. So to set this up, we'll choose tasks as the type of event, and our data source will be a search to retrieve all tasks on the condition that the project equals the current page project. Next, we can see that the calendar plugin asks for start and end time fields. This is why we were so specific in creating those fields for our task data type. Here, we can match the fields from our task data type for start date and end date like so. We also need to select what the caption will be, which in this case we'll want to display the name of our task. And there's a few additional settings we can play around with. For example, the views. I'll change mine to month only. These colors are just from the default plugin, but we can make them more in line with our style variables. We can make them selectable or not. We can even enable modification of dates through dragging, which is a nice feature. There's a wide range of possibilities with this plugin, so feel free to experiment and find what works for you. And if this plugin isn't what you're looking for, you most likely can find one that is, or you can build one yourself. As for the Layout tab, let's tweak some of the design settings here. We'll uncheck Fixed Width and Height so they can grow with the page, and we'll get rid of their min width and height so they can shrink. Okay, great. Let's refresh. And now we see that we have a calendar that dynamically shows us the timeline for our tasks. We can even drag the task around and notice that the end date changes when we do it. With that added, let's finalize the rest of our page. First, we can make this the current page project's name so we see that depicted somewhere on the page when you view it. And then for the back icon, we have a few options. Under navigation, we could set this up to go to the dashboard page, or we could just say go to previous page. It's up to you with how you want to do this. In this context, however, I believe it'll be a better user experience in the long run for users to go back to whatever their previous page was, no matter what it is. So I'll select that option. One more thing here is the pencil icon. This is going to pull up our last pop-up, the Edit Project pop-up. Here, users will be able to rename their project, add new team members to the project, or even delete the project altogether. So first things first, let's start a workflow on the Edit icon so it can at least show up when we click on it. And now let's go back to the project pop-up because we need to set up a few things. For this, let's use auto binding. First, let's set up the type of content to be project, and the data source can simply be the current page project. Now we can easily auto bind this field to the project name, and we'll just need to set up our privacy rules for projects like we did before. I'll name it auto binding, and now we consider who should be able to auto bind. Remember, we have to start this expression from the project data type, so we'll need to grab a user. So we'll say when this project's member list contains current user, Then we'll check that auto binding is allowed. At the moment, we'll only select name. That's all I want to allow for the time being. Now underneath, we'll have a list of all the team members on the project and a way to add or remove them. This means we have a repeating group here. But if you're using the template, you may notice it's a little tough to select the repeating group. And what happens instead is I keep selecting the group inside the first cell. This is totally normal. As your designs become cleaner and more precise, your nested groups may become a bit more compacted together. There's a variety of ways you can navigate these nested groups, but in this case, let's just reveal this group in the elements tree. Right above it, we can find and select the repeating group. Now to set this up, let's replace the dummy data and set the type of content to user and do a search for users where the user's team is equal to the current page project's team. This means we're pulling a list of all the users on our team, even the ones who aren't specifically assigned to this project. Even if we end up having 100 team members, we want to be able to display them. Let's edit this group in our first cell. We want this to be type user, taking the current cell's user as a data source. And then within this group, we have another group that we want to do that for as well. Again, this is the parent-child hierarchy that we learned about in part 1. So now for the text element itself, we want to display something about them, like their first name. And let's also display their profile picture right beside it. Now if we preview, we can see the name of the project and our two icons should be working. Let's pull up our edit pop-up. Since we set up auto binding, we can change the name of the project if we want. And beside it, we can see all the users on our team. This list of users dictates who has access to this project. Right now, this check icon would seem to indicate that both of these users are part of the project, but we know for a fact that it's only our first user. So what we want to do here is go to this icon, and we'll add a conditional that looks like this. When current page project's member list doesn't contain parent group's user. In other words, when the user in this cell is not included in the list of members attached to this project, then let's change the icon. Instead of a check in a circle, it'll just be an empty circle. And remember, if you ever want to preview what a condition looks like, we can always toggle this on and off. Okay, this gives us half of our logic. Let's copy and paste this condition, and now flip it to say if this list does contain the user, the icon will be a check mark. Now if we refresh our preview and pull up the pop-up, we can see a more accurate representation of who in our team is and is not in this project. So what we need to do is set up a workflow to make it possible for us to add a user to the project. So we'll go to the icon and start a workflow. And right up front, let's actually add a condition to this event. In fact, we can paste the same condition from before, when current page project's member list doesn't contain the parent group's user. If that condition is true, then we'll run this workflow. And in this workflow, we'll make changes to a thing. The thing we want to change is the current page project. And the field we want to change is the member list. In this case, we want to add that user to this list. Let's test it. Here's our project. In the Data tab, we can see it has one user in its member list. Now if we open the pop-up and press the icon, our new user is added to the member list, which means the icon automatically changes since that condition is now met. Moreover, if we refresh our database, we can see the user has now officially been added. Lastly, we have the Delete Project button. Naturally, the simplest approach would be to start a workflow on the button and then simply delete the thing, the current page project. But you might run into a few complications, so it's wise to be extra careful when setting up destructive workflows. If not properly set up, events that remove data from the database can lead to broken pages. For example, since we'll be deleting the project here, I'll at least add in an additional step to navigate away from the project page after deletion, since the page will suddenly be missing a data source. This will be enough for now, but in all honesty, you may wish to take a bit more of an advanced look into the implications of deleting at a later time. When you do, consider this. Given that there are so many things associated with a given project in our database, what other things might we want to delete when we delete a project? And how would we go about doing that? You don't need to know the answer for now, but try to figure it out on your own. If not, we'll be sure to cover this later on. The last thing we need to set up is our user profile page. If we look at our completed example, this page is simply a repeating group showing the user all of their assigned tasks and a pop-up for editing them. At this point in the build, most of this should start to feel familiar. Let's start with the main content of this page, which is the repeating group that will show all of this user's tasks. Remember to use the elements tree if you're having trouble selecting precisely the right group. Like we've done previously, let's replace our repeating group's dummy data. We'll make it type task, and we'll search for all tasks where the assigned user is the current page user. It's important to remember the difference between current page user, the user whose page we're viewing, and current user, the user who's looking at the page. I'll choose to sort this by end date and descending set to yes, but feel free to experiment with the sort order however you'd like. Next, we have the group in our first cell. Let's pass in the task as the type of content and grab the current cell's task as the data source. Now let's go ahead and populate each of these text elements with the appropriate fields. Name, end date, which we can also format to keep it looking readable, project name, and status's display. If we preview, the only way to get to our profile page is in our header when we click on our email to show the group focus. You might want to go back and add more ways, like clicking on your own user profile picture. But once we do, we can now see our repeating group is populated based on the current page user. We have our first task here, and I'll go ahead and add a few more tasks for us to see. Feel free to do the same on your previous pages now that those are built. Now that we have a few tasks assigned to our user, I've gone ahead and created an additional project as well so we can see the distinction on this page. And everything looks good. But I'd like this page to give us the option to edit a task that we click on. So let's start a workflow on our task card. Here we'll show our pop-up element. But like before, we'll need to send data to populate this particular pop-up. So our next action will be to display data in this pop-up, specifically the current cell's task. Great, now let's look at the pop-up itself. Just like before, we'll use auto binding on all of the inputs. Don't forget to set the drop-down input to be dynamic choices. Finally, we'll start a workflow on the delete button to delete a thing, which in this case is the parent group's task that we send to the pop-up. Now let's preview. If we click on this first task, we can edit a few fields, and the changes are automatically set. Let's finish up by populating this content as well. Here, let's get the current page user's first name, hit space, and add the last name. On the template, you'll find that there's also an image element here that's a little hidden. But for this, let's set it to the current page user's profile picture and set it to use our predefined profile picture style. Last, let's set up a workflow for the back button to navigate to the previous page. And that wraps it up. Our app is really coming together as we now have all three of our project management pages up and running. As we've seen up to this point, there's still a few areas that we need to polish and a few details we have yet to tackle. So next, we'll be spending a bit more time tying up all of our remaining loose ends and getting our app ready to deploy. We've completed all three pages of our app, and we're about ready to start testing it before we deploy. But before we do that, I want to implement one more feature on each page called blank states. A blank state is what an empty or restricted page will show a user in place of its normal content. This is something that is often overlooked in app development because adding blank states might feel like extra work. In the end though, it's absolutely worth it to maintain a clean, polished user experience. It also provides an excellent opportunity to check that all your permissions and privacy rules are in place before you go live. So let's see what this looks like, starting with the dashboard page. If we open the dashboard for a team with no projects, we'd want the user to add their first project. Instead of seeing an empty repeating group here with no content, it would instead be better for us to show the larger Add Project button. So in a blank state, we'll want this hidden and this shown, and vice versa if there is content. Now for the project page, we don't need to hide or show any of these elements if the project is missing tasks, so we don't need a blank state for that. However, if a user goes to this page but they don't have access to this project, we can hide all of this and instead show a message that says that they don't have access to the project. Finally, for the profile page, we'll want a blank state in the event that the user has no assigned tasks. We'll just have this message saying exactly that. So we have a few things to set up for our blank states, and they happen to also tie into our privacy rules because we'll be taking a look at what types of permissions certain users will and won't have throughout the app. Case in point, if we were to go back to our database and run our app as our second test user and load up the dashboard page for this team, we would only see one project right now instead of all of them. That's because this user isn't assigned to every project owned by this team, so they may not have access to that project. But do we really want them to not be able to see what their team members are working on? Let's come back to our privacy rules and check that everyone can find the project in searches. Now if we go back, the cell containing the other project shows up, just not the project information. We can go back again and check that things like the project's name and member list are also visible, so once we refresh, we'll now see all the other projects our team has to work on, even ones we're not part of. This is why considering blank states can be such a useful part of the process. It gets you thinking about what we want users to see and not see, even if they technically don't have permission. Let's set up our first blank state on the dashboard. When a team has no projects, we want this entire group to hide. It's especially important to make sure collapse when hidden is checked for something like this, so the entire group disappears and isn't taking up any vertical space. So let's make sure that's checked. Let's make a conditional for when there is no list of projects. We can get that by saying do a search for projects in which the project's team equals the current page team. To finish this expression, we want to check how many projects are in that list. So we'll select the count operator and say if it's greater than 0, then this element should be visible. The caveat with this is that currently this element is visible on page load. To avoid that, we'll uncheck this from being visible on page load by default, so now this will only be visible based on this condition. Let's copy this expression and come over to our blank state button below. We'll paste our conditional, and this time instead of it being greater than 0, we'll check if it's less than 1, and if that's true, then we want this to be visible, and by default, we'll set it to be not visible. Now it's going to be hard to test this without a user attached to a new team with no projects, so we'll save our testing for this in the next lesson. For now, let's add some blank states to our remaining pages. On the project page, if a user clicks on a project they don't have access to, we want to hide all of this content and only show this message instead. To do that, let's add a conditional to the group that contains all of our content. And this time, let's create two conditions, one when it's visible and one when it's not visible. Our conditional statement will be to check if the current page project's member list contains the current user. If it does contain the current user, then the group is visible. Next, I'll copy and paste the expression and flip it to say if it doesn't contain the current user, then the group is not visible. To avoid any flashes of visibility, we'll go into the Layout tab and uncheck that the element is visible on page load. Now for our blank state group down here, we'll do the exact opposite. I'll paste in the expression, and if the member list contains current user, this will not be visible. And if it doesn't contain current user, it will be. And again, we'll uncheck that it's visible on page load by default. This blank state we can test right now, so let's refresh our dashboard and let's click on a project that our user is currently not a member of. And perfect, we only see what we should see, which is the blank state. Let's go back to this link and set up a workflow for it to send us back to our previous page. Okay, great. Now let's do the profile page. Down here, our template came with this message to say that no tasks have been assigned to edit me. So if you're using the template, let's go in and change this to be current page user's first name. And if we want to call out their name a bit more specifically, we can use rich text to bold this either by writing BB code or using the rich text editor built into Bubble. Now let's write in our conditionals to show and hide each section. First, on our group here with all of our tasks, let's add one that searches for tasks in which the assigned user is equal to the current page user, and then select the count from that list. If that count is not 0, then this element is visible. Now let's copy and paste this expression onto the blank state group and flip it. If the count is 0, then this element is visible. And for both groups, we'll just make sure that by default they're not visible on page load and collapse when hidden is checked. When it comes to blank states, each use case is unique. It really depends on what you would like to do with your application to set them up. Now it's time to start testing and polishing our app. Bubble is an incredibly fast tool, and you can always reship and redeploy versions of your app at lightning speed if you wish to add or change anything about your app. All of that being said, we want to take the time to do a little bit of due diligence and make sure that everything is working as expected before we deploy. For example, there's a few extra details we could start to finesse here and there. On the dashboard, if you wanted, you could start a workflow on the cell of this repeating group to take you to the user profile page of whichever user you clicked on. There's sure to be a few more details like that as we go forward. Case in point, on our landing page, we can find 3 buttons here, 2 for sign up and 1 for login, all of which need to have a workflow set up correctly. So let's make sure they take our user to the right page. Now, once a user is logged in, they have the full app at their disposal. But before we dive into that, what happens if they log out? In our header, we already have that workflow, but let's add a step after they're logged out that navigates them all the way back to the landing page. Another important workflow to add is in the header. We'll want a workflow to check if the current user is logged out when the page loads. If they are, navigate them to the landing page instead so they don't have access to the app. That way, on any page that features our header, if the current user ever loads one of those pages and finds themselves logged out, they'll automatically be sent to the index page to log back in. Let's preview the app and log out of our test user's account. Now that we're back on the index page, let's go through the process and start at the beginning so we can test all of our workflows from start to finish. To really examine our workflows as we test, let's set the debugger to run on step by step so we manually control each workflow trigger. Starting with the sign up process, let's create a new user, and each time we trigger a new workflow, we can see how it's triggered step by step. I'll start with just test for all this info and run the workflow on our sign up button. And because we're in step-by-step mode, we can see each phase of our workflow in sequence. The custom state is changed on the page, so we can now create a new team. And in the debugger, I can actually see the new team created in the database as well as its fields. The team admin is the current user, which over here we can see evaluates to the test user we just signed up as. On our third form, I'll keep the default profile picture and select Finish. Now we'll be sent to the dashboard page, and our newly created team will be sent alongside it. The moment the page loads, we get another workflow running. That's because of our header. Whenever the page is loaded, it wants to send us back to the index, but only when this condition is met. Since we're logged in, this condition isn't met, so this workflow actually won't run. But it's good to know that the workflow is running that check anyway. Now we're on our dashboard, and our blank state is working. No repeating group, just the big Add Project button, which will trigger. And our workflow brings up the pop-up. At this point, you get the idea, so I'll switch the debugger back to normal speed to save us some time, but feel free to use whichever speed will help you the most. Now I'll create a new project, and then I'll bring up the project page. Remember, the blank state we have on this page is only going to show up if we don't have access to this, so this is expected. To test that out, let's go back and add a new user to the team. If we then run as this new user and load the dashboard again, nothing shows up at first. That's because we need to load the appropriate team. So if we click the team name in our header, it'll load the dashboard again, but we'll also send the current user's team with it. So now we're back on our dashboard, but as user test 2 this time. And now if we try to access this project, we'll see our blank state. So that's working too. And let's just click here to go back. There's certainly more we can continue to test, like the user profile page or creating and modifying tasks. At this point though, we can start to wrap up here. It looks like all of our workflows are functioning properly and the right permissions are granted. As a final check, if for whatever reason we were to navigate to a page that didn't exist, then Bubble will automatically redirect the user to a default 404 page that comes with every app. In our template, the 404 page has already been designed and includes a button that can take the user back to app login. Now that we've polished and tested that all of our workflows and privacy rules are running properly, we're ready to deploy. I've gone ahead and upgraded this app to a paid plan so that we're able to deploy live. To do this, we come to the development dropdown and hit Deploy Current Version to Live. We'll include a deployment message saying something like Initial Launch and hit Deploy. Congrats, now your app is live. Remember, Bubble provides you with 2 app environments, one for development and one for live. This whole time that we've been building, we've been using the development version. We know this because version test has been in the URL this whole time. Now that we've deployed a version to live, if we get rid of that and reload, we'll see the live version of our app, which is everything our version test has, but without the test data. I recommend creating your own account on live so you can have some data here to experiment with. Remember, the 2 app environments, dev and live, have their own distinct databases. Up to this point, all the data we've worked with has only lived in our dev database. Now when our users interact with our live app, all of that data will live inside the live database. So the first deploy is always exciting, but it's certainly not the last. More often than not, your first deploy is not the one you share with the world. In fact, I encourage you to keep deploying your app to get in the habit of updating it and keep track of the changes you make, so if you needed to revert, you know what change to revert to. Before we talk about how to grow your app, here are other things to explore in your own time now that you've deployed. Remember how we show the same pop-up in multiple places? Well, if you create a custom event, you can store your actions there and trigger the custom event instead. This helps lessen duplication amongst your workflows. Try and find some other areas in the app where you can replace a common set of actions with a custom event. In the Settings tab, be sure to adjust your global SEO fields, like title, description, and thumbnail. These are all used when sending links for your app. You can override this on the page level in the Page Property Editor, but when making changes here, make sure you give it a few hours to propagate. There are also advanced SEO properties to explore and customize, so be sure to take a look. Under General, it's important to define some security settings for your editor and for your development run mode. Ideally, leave the editor application rights as private, so only you have access to the editor. However, unless you check Limit Access in Run Mode, everyone can see the Run Mode version of your development and live environments. Consider locking Run Mode access down behind a username and password, especially for development. When you're ready, unlock it for live. On a paid plan, copy the name of your domain to retrieve your A records, then paste the A records with your domain provider. For more info here, see our full tutorial. On certain paid plans, you can add collaborators to help you build simply by inviting them and giving them permission. There are thousands of plugins at your disposal. If you don't find the element or action or connection you're looking for out of the box, try searching for the plugin. If the plugin doesn't exist, you can create one yourself with the plugin editor. A special plugin of ours is called the API Connector. It's where you connect your Bubble app to any API and build your own custom connections. For an in-depth look on how to do this, check out our course covering an intro to APIs and the API Connector. Alright, next in part 3 of this Getting Started course, we'll cover some advanced features and techniques that you can implement to help your app scale as your user base grows. Until then, don't forget to check out our other videos on Bubble Academy.